This is my true story. At my grandson's wedding in Vancouver, I walked through the door carrying a gift I had saved 6 months of pension to buy. My son saw me, grabbed my arm, and whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Why are you even here? You smell like a nursing home." His wife laughed. My grandson turned away. I stood there in my best suit, the one my late wife had picked out 20 years ago, holding a wrapped box that suddenly felt heavier than my entire life. They had no idea that everything they celebrated that night still belonged to me. Within 72 hours, their world would collapse. But first, let me tell you where you are watching from, and please subscribe to hear the rest. It was supposed to be the happiest day of the year. My grandson Marcus was getting married at a beautiful venue overlooking English Bay. The invitation had arrived 3 months earlier, a crisp white envelope with gold lettering. I remember holding it in my trembling hands, reading my name printed there like an afterthought. Harold Chen, it said. Table 14. I did not know then that table 14 was the farthest from the family, tucked behind a pillar where no one would have to look at me. I am 68 years old. I came to Canada from Hong Kong when I was 19 with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. I worked construction in the freezing Toronto winters. I drove a taxi in Calgary during the oil boom. I saved every dollar, invested every spare cent, and eventually built a small empire of rental properties across British Columbia. 12 buildings, 47 units, all paid off, all in my name. When my wife passed away 8 years ago, I made a decision that I thought was wise. I wanted my children to feel secure. I wanted them to know they would never struggle the way I had. So I transferred management of the properties to my 2 sons, David and Richard. I gave them signing authority on the business accounts. I let them collect the rents and handle the tenants. I kept only one thing for myself, the deeds. Every single property remained in my name. My lawyer had advised me to wait until I was gone to transfer ownership fully. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understand he was being kind. The morning of the wedding, I woke early in my small apartment in Burnaby. The place is modest, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a view of the mountains on clear days. I had moved there after my wife died because the old house felt too empty without her. My sons had been eager for me to sell the family home. They said it was too much for me to maintain. What they meant was they wanted the money. I sold it eventually and gave them each a share. I kept just enough to live comfortably, or so I thought. I showered carefully that morning, mindful of my aging joints. I trimmed my gray hair, polished my shoes, and pressed my suit until the creases were sharp enough to cut paper. My wife used to say I cleaned up well for an old construction worker. I smiled at my reflection and imagined her standing behind me, adjusting my tie the way she always did. The gift sat on my kitchen table, a jade pendant that had belonged to my mother, reset in white gold, with small diamonds surrounding it. I had taken it to a jeweler in Richmond who specialized in heirloom pieces. It cost me $4,000 to have it restored, nearly half my monthly pension. But Marcus was my first grandchild. He deserved something meaningful. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon. I arrived early, as I always do. The venue was stunning, all glass walls and ocean views, with white flowers cascading from every surface. I recognized faces from years past, relatives I had helped immigrate to Canada, business partners I had supported through difficult times, former tenants who now owned their own homes because I had given them fair rent and second chances. None of them approached me. They nodded politely and looked away, as if embarrassed to acknowledge the old man standing alone by the entrance. My son David found me first. He is 52 now, with silver threading through his hair and a stomach that speaks to too many business dinners. He walked toward me with that smile I had learned to distrust, the one that never reached his eyes. "Dad," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You made it." I told him, of course I made it. My grandson was getting married. Nothing would keep me away. David's smile tightened. "Just try to keep a low profile, okay? This is Marcus's day. We don't want any awkwardness." I did not understand what he meant. I was simply a grandfather attending a wedding. What awkwardness could there be? But I nodded anyway, because that is what I had trained myself to do. Nod. Agree. Keep the peace. The ceremony was beautiful. Marcus looked handsome in his tailored suit, and his bride, Jennifer, was radiant in white lace. I watched from my seat behind the pillar, craning my neck to catch glimpses between the shoulders of strangers. When they exchanged vows, I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought of my own wedding 50 years ago, a simple ceremony in a community center with borrowed chairs and homemade food. My wife had worn her mother's dress, altered to fit her tiny frame. We had nothing then, but we had everything. After the ceremony, I made my way toward the family. I wanted to congratulate Marcus, to give him my gift, to tell him how proud I was. But as I approached, I heard my son Richard's voice cut through the crowd. "What is he doing here?" Richard muttered to his wife. I thought David told him to stay at his table. His wife, a woman named Sandra, who had never liked me, rolled her eyes. "He probably forgot. You know how he is, getting senile." I stopped walking. The words hit me like a physical blow. Senile. I had built everything they stood upon, and they called me senile. Richard turned and saw me. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just annoyance. He forced a smile and walked over. "Dad, hey, great ceremony, right?" I agreed. I asked if I could speak to Marcus, give him my gift. Richard glanced at the wrapped box in my hands. "What is that?" "You didn't need to bring anything. We've got it covered." I explained it was something special, a family heirloom, something his grandmother would have wanted Marcus to have. Richard sighed heavily, as if I had just asked him to carry a boulder up a mountain. "Fine, but make it quick. There's a schedule." He led me through the crowd toward where Marcus stood with his new bride. People parted as we walked, and I noticed the looks. Some curious, some pitying, some openly contemptuous. I did not understand what I had done to earn such treatment. I had only ever tried to be a good father, a good grandfather, a good provider. Marcus saw me coming and his expression shifted. Not joy, not warmth, something closer to embarrassment. He leaned toward his wife and whispered something. She glanced at me and pressed her lips together. "Grandpa," Marcus said flatly, "thanks for coming." I told him I was so proud of him. I told him he looked wonderful. I told him his grandmother would have been overjoyed to see this day. Then I held out my gift. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I had it restored for you, for Jennifer. Something to pass down to your own children someday." Marcus took the box without opening it. He handed it to his wife, who tucked it under her arm like an afterthought. "Thanks," Marcus said. "That's nice." I waited for something more. A hug, a real thank you. Some acknowledgement that I had just given him a piece of our family's history. But Marcus had already turned away, laughing at something one of his friends had said. That was when David reappeared. He grabbed my elbow harder than necessary. "Dad, you need to go back to your table. Dinner is starting." I asked if I could sit with the family. I had not seen everyone in so long. It would be nice to catch up. David's face hardened. "Your table is 14. That's where you're assigned. We can't just rearrange everything because you want to chat." I looked at him, my eldest son, the child I had carried on my shoulders through Stanley Park, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in the rain, the young man whose university tuition I had paid without complaint. He stared back at me like I was a stranger begging for change. "Please, David," I said quietly. "Just for dinner. I won't cause any trouble." David leaned close. His breath smelled of whiskey. "You are trouble, Dad. You always have been. You think everyone owes you something because you built some buildings 50 years ago. But guess what? That's done. You're done. Now go sit down and stop embarrassing us." He pushed me, not hard enough to knock me over, but hard enough to make me stumble. A few guests nearby noticed. Someone gasped. David straightened his jacket and walked away without looking back. I stood there for a moment, feeling every one of my 68 years pressing down on my spine. The noise of the reception faded to a dull roar. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, slow and steady, pumping blood through a body that had endured so much, built so much, sacrificed so much. I walked to table 14. It was exactly where I had been told, behind a pillar, next to the service corridor. The other guests at my table were people I did not recognize, distant connections who spent the dinner talking among themselves. No one asked my name. No one asked how I knew the family. I ate my salmon in silence and watched the celebration unfold from the shadows. The speeches came after dinner. David spoke about what a wonderful son Marcus had always been, how proud the family was, how bright the future looked. Richard joked about the responsibilities of marriage, earning laughter from the crowd. Marcus thanked everyone for coming, listed off names of people who had supported him through the years. Grandparents on his mother's side, aunts and uncles, friends from school. He did not mention me, not once. I sat very still through all of it. I did not cry. I did not shout. I simply watched and remembered and let each moment burn itself into my memory. After the cake was cut and the dancing began, I decided to leave. I had stayed long enough. I had done my duty as a grandfather. There was no reason to remain where I was not wanted. I was walking toward the exit when Sandra intercepted me, Richard's wife. She blocked my path with a glass of champagne in her hand and a smile that looked more like a sneer. "Leaving so soon, Harold?" she asked. "Don't you want to see the bouquet toss?" I told her I was tired. It had been a long day. "I bet it has," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must be exhausting, pretending you still matter." I stared at her. This woman who had married into my family, who lived in a house I had helped purchase, who drove a car my business had paid for. "Excuse me?" I said. Sandra stepped closer. "Let me be clear, since everyone else is too polite. You're a relic, Harold, a leftover from another time. David and Richard have been running things for years now. The buildings, the tenants, the money, they don't need you hovering around reminding them of the old days. So why don't you go back to your little apartment and stay there?" She patted my cheek like I was a child and walked away laughing. I stood frozen in the middle of the room. Around me, people danced and celebrated. Music thumped through the speakers. Champagne flowed like water. And I understood, finally, completely, what I had become to my own family. An inconvenience, an embarrassment, a remnant they tolerated because it was socially required. I walked outside into the cool Vancouver night. The air smelled of salt and cedar. Across the bay, the lights of the city sparkled like scattered diamonds. I stood at the railing and looked out at the water, letting the wind dry the tears I had not realized were falling. My wife had warned me. Years ago, when she was still alive, she had watched how our sons spoke to me, how they dismissed my opinions, how they took my generosity for granted. "They have forgotten who made them," she said one night, her voice soft with sadness. "One day, you will have to remind them." I had laughed it off then. "They were just busy," I told her. "They had their own lives, their own struggles. They still loved me. They would always love me." Standing on that balcony, watching my reflection shimmer in the dark water below, I finally admitted the truth. My wife had been right, and now she was gone, and I was alone. And the children I had sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than an old fool to be tolerated and dismissed. I took a taxi home that night. The driver was a young Filipino man who asked about my evening. I told him I had been to a wedding. "Family?" he asked. I nodded. "That's beautiful," he said. "Family is everything." I did not respond. I just looked out the window and watched the city lights blur past. When I got home, I did not turn on the lights. I sat in my armchair in the darkness, surrounded by photographs of people who no longer knew me. My wife on our wedding day, my sons as babies, my grandchildren taking their first steps, a lifetime of memories hanging on walls, collecting dust, meaning nothing to anyone but me. I sat there until dawn, thinking, remembering, planning. When the first light crept through my window, I knew what I had to do, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. They had forgotten that everything they had came from me. It was time to remind them. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I had not felt in years. The humiliation from the wedding still lingered like a bruise, but something else had taken root alongside it. Purpose. I made myself tea and sat at my kitchen table with the old binder I kept in my filing cabinet. Inside were documents spanning 40 years, property deeds, corporate registrations, bank statements, investment portfolios. Every piece of paper told a story of sacrifice and ambition, of early mornings and late nights, of a young immigrant who refused to let Canada defeat him. My sons had assumed control of the day-to-day operations years ago. They collected rents, paid expenses, handled repairs. But they had never bothered to understand the structure I had built. The properties were held through a family trust I had established in 1989. The trust gave me, as the settlor, absolute authority over all assets until my death or voluntary transfer. David and Richard were beneficiaries, nothing more. They had signing authority on the operating accounts, but the real power, the ownership, remained with me. They had never read the documents. They had never asked questions. They simply assumed that because they handled the money, they controlled it. That assumption was about to cost them everything. I called my lawyer first. Winston Tam had been my attorney for 30 years, a meticulous man who remembered every clause of every document he had ever drafted. "Harold," he said warmly, "how was the wedding?" I told him the truth, every detail. The table behind the pillar, David's words, Sandra's cruelty, the gift that was dismissed, the speech that forgot me. Winston listened in silence. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Harold. That's not how families should treat each other." I agreed. Then I told him what I wanted to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure? This will change everything." I told him I was certain. For the first time in years, I was absolutely certain. "Then let's begin," Winston said. "I'll prepare the documents today." The next call was to my accountant, Grace Wong. She managed the trust's finances and had always been puzzled by my son's careless attitude toward record-keeping. "Harold, I've been meaning to call you," she said. "There are some irregularities in the accounts, large withdrawals that don't match any property expenses." I asked her to explain. Over the past 2 years, approximately $400,000 has been moved from the operating accounts to personal accounts belonging to David and Richard. The paperwork claims it's management fees, but the amounts far exceed what we agreed upon. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They had not only disrespected me, they had stolen from me. "Document everything," I said. "I want a complete audit within 72 hours. Grace hesitated. "Harold, if I do this, your sons will know something is happening." "Let them wonder," I said. For now, the third call was to Raymond Chu, a real estate agent who specialized in commercial properties. I had known Raymond for 20 years and trusted him completely. "Raymond, I need you to prepare valuations for all 12 properties. Quietly, no listing announcements, no public records, just accurate market assessments." Raymond whistled softly. "That's a lot of real estate, Harold. Are you thinking of selling?" "I'm thinking of options," I said. "How quickly can you work?" "Give me 48 hours. By noon, the machinery was in motion. Lawyers, accountants, and agents, all working toward a single goal. My sons had no idea. They were probably recovering from the wedding, nursing hangovers, and congratulating themselves on a successful event. They had no clue that the foundation beneath their comfortable lives was shifting. I spent the afternoon reviewing documents, every deed, every contract, every clause. My eyes grew tired, but my mind stayed sharp. I found what I was looking for, buried in the fine print of the trust agreement. Clause 17, Section 4. The settlor retains full authority to amend, revoke, or dissolve the trust at any time without notice to beneficiaries. Upon dissolution, all assets revert to the settlor's direct ownership. I had insisted on that clause 40 years ago. Winston had called it unnecessary. "Your sons would never give you reason to use it," he had said. I ran my finger over those words. 40 years of foresight. 40 years of hoping I would never need this protection. And now, here I was, grateful for the paranoia of my younger self. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Rice and steamed fish, the way my wife used to make it. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, thinking about the days ahead. There would be chaos. There would be accusations. There would be tears and pleas, and probably threats. But I felt no fear, only resolution. After dinner, I wrote a letter. Not to my sons, to myself. Dear Harold, today you chose dignity over comfort. You chose truth over pretense. You chose to remember who you are. Your wife would be proud. Your ancestors would be proud. Now see it through. I sealed the letter and placed it in my drawer, next to a photograph of my wife on our 40th anniversary. She smiled at me from the picture, her eyes full of the warmth I missed every single day. I should have listened to you sooner, I whispered. But better late than never. The next 3 days moved with the precision of a military operation. Winston drafted dissolution papers for the family trust. Grace completed her audit, revealing that my sons had siphoned nearly $500,000 over 2 years through fabricated expense reports. Raymond delivered his valuations, showing that my 12 properties were worth a combined $14.6 million in the current market. I sat with these numbers and felt nothing but calm. $14 million, a lifetime of work, and my sons had treated me like a burden to be hidden behind a pillar. On the 4th day, I signed the dissolution papers. With a single signature, the family trust ceased to exist. All 12 properties, all accounts, all investments reverted to my direct personal ownership. David and Richard's names vanished from every document as if they had never been there. I called Raymond immediately after. List them all, I said. Every property, market rate, immediate sale preferred. All 12? Raymond asked, incredulous. All 12. Harold, that will take months to... Then start today. The first property sold within 36 hours. A rental building in East Vancouver that I had purchased in 1992. The buyer was a development company looking to expand their portfolio. They paid $3.2 million in cash. The transaction closed before my sons even knew it was listed. The second and third properties followed within a week. A commercial strip mall in Surrey. A small apartment complex in New Westminster. Each sale deposited millions into my personal account, an account my sons had no access to and no knowledge of. I did not spend the money. I simply watched the numbers grow and waited. The calls started on day 12. David phoned first. His voice had that strained quality I recognized from years of bailing him out of problems. Dad, hey, I tried to process some payments for the Fraser Street building and the account is frozen. Do you know what's going on? I told him I was not sure. Perhaps he should check with the bank. I did, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. They said the account was closed by the primary holder. That's you, Dad. What's happening? I told him I would look into it. Then I hung up. Richard called an hour later, more agitated. Dad, something's wrong. I drove by the Victoria property this morning, and there's a sold sign in front. Did you sell it? Without telling us? I told him real estate markets move quickly. Sometimes decisions have to be made. Decisions? What decisions? That building generates $80,000 a year in rent. Why would you sell it? I told him I had my reasons. Your reasons? Richard's voice rose to a shout. Dad, we manage these properties. We have tenants depending on us. You can't just sell things without consultation. I reminded him that the properties were mine. Always had been. The trust documents were very clear on that point. The line went silent. What are you talking about? Richard said slowly. We're beneficiaries. We have rights. I told him to read the documents. Really read them this time. Then I hung up. The panic spread through my family like wildfire. Over the next week, I received dozens of calls. David, Richard, Sandra, even Marcus, my grandson, who had not spoken to me since dismissing my gift at his wedding. Grandpa, what's going on? Marcus asked, his voice suddenly soft with concern. Mom says you're selling everything. Is it true? I told him it was true. But why? Where will we live? Dad says the house is part of your portfolio. I told him his father should have thought about that before telling me I embarrassed him, before calling me senile, before treating me like garbage at his own son's wedding. Grandpa, I'm sorry if... I did not let him finish. Sorry is a word, Marcus. It costs nothing and means less. When you receive a gift that took months of savings and decades of memory, you do not tuck it under your arm and walk away. When your grandfather travels across the city to celebrate your happiness, you do not pretend he does not exist. You made your choices. Now I am making mine. I hung up before he could respond. By day 20, I had sold 8 of the 12 properties. The remaining 4 were under contract with closing dates scheduled. My personal account held over $11 million. My son's operating accounts held nothing. Their signing authority had been revoked. Their access to the tenants, the buildings, the income, everything had evaporated. They came to my apartment on a Tuesday evening. All of them. David, Richard, Sandra, even Marcus and his wife Jennifer. They stood in my living room like strangers, expensive clothes wrinkled, faces pale with shock. "Dad," David said, his voice cracking, "please, we need to talk about this." I gestured for them to sit. They arranged themselves awkwardly on my modest furniture, cramped and uncomfortable in the small space they had never bothered to visit. "Talk," I said. David glanced at Richard. Richard stared at the floor. Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, David found his voice. "We know we haven't been. We know things haven't been perfect. But this is extreme, Dad. You've destroyed us. Richard's house is being foreclosed. My investment accounts are frozen because they were tied to the trust. Sandra's car was repossessed this morning. We have nothing left." I nodded slowly. "Now you understand." "Understand what?" Richard shouted, finally looking up. "That our own father stabbed us in the back?" I stood up from my chair. Despite my age, I felt strong, steady, calm. "I built everything you ever had," I said quietly. "Every building, every account, every opportunity. I came to this country with nothing and created something from nothing. I gave you education, security, futures. And what did you give me in return?" No one answered. "You gave me a table behind a pillar," I continued. "You gave me whispered insults. You gave me a grandson who cannot even thank his grandfather for a family heirloom. You gave me a daughter-in-law who called me a relic to my face. You gave me sons who steal from me while calling me senile." David's face went white. "Dad, those expense reports were $437,000, I interrupted. "Over 2 years. Grace Wong documented everything. Did you think I would not notice? Did you think I was too old to read a spreadsheet?" The room fell silent. "I spent 40 years building an empire for my family," I said. "I thought that family would honor me. Instead, you treated me like a burden, like an embarrassment, like someone to hide away and forget. So I am giving you what you deserve. Nothing. Because that is how you made me feel. Like nothing." Sandra started crying. Richard put his head in his hands. David just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Dad," David whispered, "please, there has to be something, some way to fix this. We're your sons." I walked to my window and looked out at the mountains in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You stopped being my sons the moment you forgot where you came from," I said. "You stopped being my sons when you laughed at my expense, when you pushed me and told me I was done, when you treated me like a stranger at my own grandson's wedding." I turned back to face them. "I am not selling everything to hurt you. I am selling everything to teach you. You need to learn what it means to build something from nothing. You need to understand the value of respect, of gratitude, of family. Maybe in 10 years, if you earn it, we can try again. But right now, today, there is nothing left to discuss." I walked to the door and opened it. "Goodbye." They filed out one by one, broken and stunned. Sandra was sobbing. Richard looked like he might collapse. David stopped at the threshold and turned back. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." I looked at him. My eldest, the first child I ever held, the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest while I watched hockey games, the man who had become a stranger. "Sorry is a start," I said, "but it is only a start." I closed the door. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. The weeks that followed were quiet. I did not hear from my sons. I learned through Winston that David had taken a job at an accounting firm, something he had not done in 20 years. Richard had moved his family into a rental apartment in Langley. Sandra had reportedly filed for divorce, though I took no satisfaction in that news. Marcus called once, 3 weeks after the confrontation. His voice was different, softer, more thoughtful. "Grandpa, I found the pendant. The one you gave us at the wedding. Jennifer put it in a drawer and forgot about it. I found it this morning and I finally really looked at it." I said nothing. "It's beautiful," he continued. "The jade, the setting, the history behind it." I showed Jennifer some old photos of great-grandma wearing it. She cried. We both cried. I still said nothing. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. For everything. For how we treated you. For taking you for granted. For not seeing you." I let his words hang in the air for a moment. "Thank you, Marcus," I finally said. "That means something. Can we maybe have dinner sometime? Just you and me? Not about money or properties or any of that. Just dinner. Grandfather and grandson." I thought about it. The anger was still there, buried deep. But beneath it was something else. Hope, perhaps. The faint possibility that one person in my family might actually learn. "Call me in 3 months," I said. "If you still want to talk then, we can talk." He thanked me and hung up. I have not heard from him yet. It has only been 6 weeks, but I find myself wondering, hoping, that he will call. I sold the final property last month. The proceeds brought my total to $14.3 million after taxes and fees. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I have set up a charitable foundation in my wife's name that will provide scholarships to immigrant students pursuing education in Canada. The foundation will outlive me. It will help young people who remind me of myself 50 years ago, hungry and hopeful and willing to work. I kept only enough to live comfortably. A small house on Vancouver Island, overlooking the ocean. A modest investment portfolio that generates steady income. Simple needs for simple days. I walk along the beach every morning now. The sand is cool under my feet. The waves speak in a language that requires no translation. Sometimes I collect shells. Sometimes I just stand and breathe. The locals know me as Harold, the quiet Chinese man who moved here from the city. They do not know about the buildings or the money or the family drama. They just know that I smile and wave and occasionally bring fresh fish to the community center. I think about my wife every day. I talk to her photograph every night before bed. I tell her about the sunrise and the birds and the neighbor's dog that follows me on my walks. "You were right," I tell her. About everything. About the boys. About patience. About knowing when enough is enough. Sometimes I imagine she responds. "I know," she says in my mind. "I always knew. I do not regret what I did. The empire I built was mine to give and mine to take. My sons needed to learn that inheritance is not a right, but a privilege. That respect is not optional, but essential. That family bonds can be broken when they are taken for granted. Will we reconcile? Perhaps. Time has a way of softening the sharpest edges. But reconciliation must be earned, not demanded. They must prove, through actions and not words, that they understand what they lost and why they lost it. Until then, I will wait. I will watch the ocean. I will remember the man I used to be and honor the man I have become. They made me feel worthless. I made them understand value. They dismissed me as a relic. I showed them the power of legacy. They told me I was done. I proved I had only just begun. My name is Harold Chen. I am 68 years old. I built an empire from nothing, gave it to ungrateful children, and then took it back with nothing but patience and paper. This is not a story of revenge. This is a story of restoration, of a man who finally remembered his worth, of a father who taught his sons the hardest lesson of all. Respect is earned, trust is sacred, and nothing built on contempt will ever survive. The tide is coming in now. I can hear it from my window. Tomorrow I will walk the beach again and think about all the years that led me here, the struggles, the sacrifices, the triumphs, and the failures. But tonight, I am at peace. For the first time in decades, I am truly at peace.